A story just breaking today out of One Arrowhead Drive. It looks like the Kansas City Chiefs will be placing Hollywood Brown on the IR, a longer term solution because he will have to have sternoclavicular surgery for the separation in that joint. So I have 5 thoughts on this. They're not going to be all negative. Now, I think that obviously you lose a player to injury until at least week 7 versus the 49ers. There's going to be a lot of negative there, but there are going to be silver linings. We have talked time and again on this channel about the silver linings that have seemed to pop up around injuries with this Chiefs team. The team normally seems to have some type of answer at the position that ends up working on a long-term basis for the team. Now, that said, the number 2 point here, this is another case of Brett Veach and the curse of free agents. Nothing for Brett Veach on the free agent front seems to ever work out. It is a weird thing, but I do think that it is not unusual that there is a miss rate with free agents higher than you would expect because these are players who have been in the NFL and have contributed at the professional level. I think part of this is that it's just so a lot of it is the fact that there are different strategies between teams. There are different ways of building a team, right? So you still might not have a scheme fit for a guy, but it's a guy who does fit very well in a different offense. So like if Hollywood Brown came to Kansas City and didn't work out, it would be because of something like that. There was something particular to his time in Baltimore that made him the 1,000-yard receiver that he had been. I do think that also this highlights why Brett Veach has tried so hard. Brett Veach and the Kansas City Chiefs in general have tried so hard to build through the draft. First off, the players you get through the draft are much cheaper than free agents. But also, if there is a hit and miss rate, you may as well be taking a hit or miss rate with a player that A, has a much longer time under contract, a much longer time left in the NFL, and a much cheaper player than you are getting through free agency. Now, we all talked about what a bargain it was that Hollywood Brown was going to be in Kansas City for only $7 to $11 million. But we also added the caveat that he seems to be hurt sometimes, doesn't finish a whole lot of seasons with a full slate of starts. Obviously, he will not here in Kansas City either. One thing that did not make its way onto this list, because it is perhaps in poor taste to notice this, but maybe it is a conversation piece nonetheless. Hollywood Brown had signed his deal in Kansas City $7 to $11 million for a 1-year stint with Patrick Mahomes in order to prove himself once again, to prove that his time in Arizona was not his time in the NFL, that time was not reflective of his talents in the NFL. It was a 1-year prove-it deal. And maybe not. Looks like he will not be moving on to a multi-year contract probably with anyone at the conclusion of this season. Maybe he will, right? He could come back and absolutely dominate the last 10 games of the season through the playoffs, etc. But that injury is going to be like, how good do you feel about that injury? Now, this does stink. Moving on to that number 3 point there, this is a bad thing, but it's not season destroying. The first reason is this: the Kansas City Chiefs took 7 wide receivers into the season. They took 7 wide receivers onto their initial 53-man roster, ended up having to have to open up a roster spot for another player because of the Hollywood Brown injury. But this injury does make it does allow the Chiefs to have a better balance. The Chiefs had 27 offensive players, 23 defensive players. This allows them the flexibility, just one spot, but more flexibility to have a better balanced roster. Now, the real silver lining to this, obviously, is Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy played 34 snaps versus the Ravens. He was necessitated into action because of the Hollywood Brown injury. I think probably the Chiefs were hoping to bring him along a little bit slower at the time he was drafted. They are not allowed that luxury. Now, much like the situation with Rashee Rice last year, he was forced into action, was Rashee Rice, because the Chiefs didn't have talent or depth. Now, Xavier Worthy is being put into that same predicament. Remember what happened with Rashee Rice last year. He was not a number one receiver through most of the year. Around the week 10, 11 mark, he started to emerge a little bit. By the time the Chiefs got into the playoffs, he was looking like a full-blown number one wide receiver. And now, 1 week into the 2024 season, he was dominant against the Ravens. So maybe by the time the playoffs hit, Xavier Worthy, I'm not thinking that he will be dominant number one wide receiver stuff maybe, but he will know his place in this offense. He will be growing into that role. Positive number C here, Rashee Rice in year 2 will have to continue to step up. He showed that he is a number one wide receiver in that Ravens game without Hollywood Brown on the field, with a complimentary receiver of Xavier Worthy taking the top off of the defense, with a complimentary receiver of tight end Travis Kelce, allowing him the single coverage to get open in the middle of the field. He did so. He made the catches. He turned and ran. He was an absolute force in that game. This forcing him to retain that role further accelerates his transcendence to a number one wide receiver. The number D point that I have here, Justin Ross and Nico Remigio may actually get a chance now. There is a point later in this, the very big bad here, but that I won't talk about right now. I'll talk about it later. But imagine how Justin Ross and Nico Remigio would actually get an I am tongue-tied right now, get the opportunity to play football, be on the field in the NFL. It's possible now that even if for only a game or two stints, one of these guys may get promoted to the active roster and have some reps, have some receptions, have some targets, etc., and we could learn a little bit more about them in a season where they were not expected to be on the field at all. This letter E here is something that's important to remember. Hollywood, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Mecole Hardman were all one-year rentals coming into this season. So as long as all things turn out positive in the win column, does that make sense? As long as the Chiefs are winning these games, even if they don't have the firepower to be blowing teams out, as long as they are winning these games, 31-30, 28-26, whatever it is, any reps that Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, Sky Moore, Justin Ross, and Nico Remigio can get will turn out for the best. I have not lost total hope in Sky Moore, but even if I had, having to see him on the field will force the Kansas City Chiefs into a decision on the future for Sky Moore. The danger here is this: further injuries at the wide receiver position. Hollywood Brown is down. We haven't seen Hollywood Brown on the field. Not a big deal right now. Someone else gets injured, the entire lineup starts to look a whole lot like it did last year. Not quite, I don't think, as bad as it was last year, because I think you have a whole lot more consistency in this group, but boy, it sure does look a lot less lustrous than it did just last week. One more injury at the position could prove devastating. Now, a couple other points here. Here's a thinker. We don't know what the offense will look like with Hollywood and Xavier Worthy on the field at the same time. Hasn't happened. You can't count preseason. We haven't seen this offense with Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown on the field at the same time. But consider this. We might never know, by the way. We might never know. Who knows if Hollywood Brown comes back from this surgery? Consider this, however. Hollywood Brown. So the two, Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy, have very similar use cases, have very similar games, quote unquote, in the NFL. They are comparable receivers. Hollywood Brown was signed March 14th. He was signed to a $7 to $11 million deal for 1 season. This is not an aggressive deal. It is a value deal. It is a deal that the Chiefs relented and said, okay, this is what we are willing to offer. If you want to play for the Kansas City Chiefs, 1 year prove-it deal, we will give you $7 to $11 million based on performance. Hollywood Brown said yes. Give me the season with the most talented quarterback in the league to prove that I can then get a bigger contract. He is a receiver comparable to Xavier Worthy. He was signed March 14th. Xavier Worthy was drafted April 25th, a month and a half later. The Chiefs, by the way, who did not move aggressively towards Hollywood Brown, traded up, not a whole lot of points up, not sacrificing a whole lot of points to move up and get Xavier Worthy, but they needed those picks. They would have been better off having more picks than fewer in this past draft. They moved up several picks in an aggressive fashion. It is possible here that Andy Reid was working out what he wanted this offense to look like and said, I need a speed guy. I need an Xavier Worthy Hollywood Brown style wide receiver. It's possible that at that moment that Andy Reid went to Brett Veach and said, look, you've got to get me a speed guy. Brett Veach, always with an eye on the draft, was hopeful that he could get Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy of 4.21 speed. Xavier Worthy, who had proven to be a speed guy and have some wiggle at Texas. It's possible that was always option one. Xavier Worthy fell into their lap. They took him because they had to have someone. They signed him because he was a sure thing. And then their number one idea of Xavier Worthy was there anyway. So you go ahead and have them both. So I think that is something interesting to think about. But the number 5 point that I have here is this. It's a sneaky positive. If Hollywood Brown comes back, say he comes back week 7, that is the 49ers game. Say he comes back in time for week 7 to play the San Francisco 49ers. No one knows what that offense looks like. No one. No one, including the San Francisco 49ers. Do you remember last year, I think it was week 7, last year that Charles Omenihu came back for the defense. No one knew what an already top-tier defense looked like adding Charles Omenihu. And boy, when they did add Charles Omenihu, things went very good for this defense. It got very interesting, very fast. It is possible Hollywood Brown comes back to this offense. This offense has a role for 2 speedsters in it, not a speedster and a bonus spot. It is possible that this offense has a role, a clear and defined role for both of those guys. And once Hollywood Brown comes back, if everyone is healthy, the Chiefs will finally have their full offense on display in time to hopefully beat the 49ers and make their playoff run. That would be an absolutely sneaky backdoor positive for this entire situation. That's all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, the Chiefs are the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week, and I hope to have you back for the next one.